Nick Taliaferro is my name. This special broadcast links us now to the finest art museum in the country, the oldest art museum in the country, and it doesn't look a day over 25. It is so radiant with health. We're glad to be here in the Rhoden room of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. We just heard from the new president of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, Mr. Eric Pryor, and now we get an opportunity to speak with someone who serves a crucial role when it comes to the collecting of and the managing of art in a museum like this, and that is a curator. We're speaking now with the curator of the Evelyn and Will Kaplan art collection and the Rhoden collection. Please make welcome Dr. Brittany Webb. Dr. Webb, it's a pleasure to meet you and welcome to WURD.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure, I assure you, and I thank you. And, you know, normally when you think of someone who is first of all, let's define what a curator is, because I've been throwing the word around for years, and it was only yesterday that I understood what it meant. But if you would be so kind as to let all of our listeners know what a curator does.
Sure, sure. Curators are fond of saying that we are we are some of the people responsible for caring for the art, and the form of that care is, physically, are you attending to what the art needs in storage, making sure that it's got the proper temperature controls, if you have it on display? Are we being careful to make sure that a sculpture has the right kind of pedestal, a painting has the right kind of light, work on paper maybe isn't getting too much light when it's on display so that you don't get the work that fades? We also, I think, are responsible for the really crucial role of a kind of intellectual and cultural care for the work, making sure you put the work in proper context. For example, are you attending to what an artist cares about when they make the work, their intellectual traditions, who's training them, what kind of technique do they care about, what kind of stories do we think that work is trying to tell us or can tell us, what do we want to put that work in conversation with, other artworks, other cultural histories, other significances. That's all the work that I think a curator does.
And here I was thinking that basically the curator, just collected it and said, here it is, look at it. But you not only take care of the art itself, but you create context and environment that helps to define the art based upon what you perceive the intention of the artist to be.
Absolutely. I mean, we essentially are pushing people to say, certainly, yes, here it is, look at it. But also, are you really looking at it? Are you seeing the detail? Are you seeing the intellectual prowess? Are you seeing the genius? Are you understanding the significance of what this artist has offered up to us? It's mostly us making sure that everyone understands why we should keep looking at and appreciating this work.
As a person who has studied the way human beings live and develop and evolve, you are by training an anthropologist.
I am.
And as an anthropologist, and once again, we're throwing out really big words. I like to use big words: hippopotamus, elephant, big words, all. As a person who is an anthropologist, how does that coincide with curating art? I mean, I know you said you have to understand what the artist is trying to project. How does an anthropologist become a curator? How do those two things shake hands?
I love that question. So I am an anthropologist by training, Temple Maid. As
Woo-hoo.
a cultural anthropologist, one of the things that I, keep in mind when I talk about exhibitions is, one, this idea of thinking about how something gets made, and not just physically, but culturally. So I like to think about, in addition to something like art history, where we attend to an artist's biography and where we went to school and what they care about, I really like thinking about culture, material culture.
Hmm.
So I often tell people, I think the greatest exhibitions are the ones where you can see a little bit of the seams. You get a sense of how your exhibition sausage gets made. So, we're sitting in the Rhoden Arts Center and we've got these great sculptures by John Rhoden around us. I think it's interesting to pay attention to, if we're looking at a gorgeous piece in wood, where does that wood come from? Does it help us to know, who is this person who made this work and what are they looking at and what else is it in conversation with? What does it mean to be in conversation with something like dance? Does it help us to know the artist's is an African American? Does it help us to know that the artist is from the South? Does it help us to know that that work is in conversation with their artist friends? Do we need to know that the artist was listening to Frankie Beverly while they made the work? Does it help you to see that work and to sort of feel it sing, to know what the artist is listening to while they're making that work? I think that's a kind of anthropological approach.
So you're telling a story visually. When people look at art. And for those of you who are not aware, the room in which we are now seated is named after an artist whose work you curate. And in some of the glass cases around you, you see some of John Rhoden's art. And the piece of art that most of us are most familiar with is, let me make sure I'm saying it right, Naseka? Naseka, which is that sculpture that is at 7th and Arch in front of the African American Museum. Tell us a little bit more about Mr. John Rhoden, who he was, and how his work came to be situated here at PAFA.
I love it. It's one of the greatest stories undertold. So John Rhoden was a Birmingham-born sculptor, born in 1916 in Birmingham, Alabama, who discovered he had an artistic talent incredibly young. He was mentored by local artists. He attended Talladega College. He met Hale Woodruff. He's a sort of celebrated figure of the art worlds of Atlanta in the South as a young man who said, you really got to go to New York. And so he went to New York in the 1930s and met all of these intellectuals and artists affiliated with what's called the Harlem Renaissance movement in the 1920s. And even though it was the 1930s, which, scholars talk about that period as being after the Renaissance, they forget that, the people are still there. Black people are still in New York making work, still in those networks. And so he was in community with artists like Richmond Barthé, who was a famous sculptor, and Augusta Savage. He knew Elaine Locke, who was the sort of dean of the Harlem Renaissance. There's archival photos of him with Bilbo Jangles Robinson and Cab Calloway. He sort of knew everybody. And then he served in World War II and went to art school on the GI Bill, and then went all over the world. He was the first black visual artist ever to be in residence at the American Academy in Rome, the first black visual artist to win the Rome Prize. He got a Rockefeller Foundation grant that supported him spending 2 years making work in wood in Indonesia. And it's so that this incredible sense of this black man in the mid-20th century who went all over the world just off the strength of his artistic talent, won every prize, got every kind of grant and award, showed in museums all over the world, leaves a footprint, a mile long. He's visited 20 countries between 1955 to 1959. So he's in Asia, he's in Japan, he's in India, he's in Africa. And he really settles in New York in the 1960s and continues to make work, has all these commissions, including the one here in Philadelphia, and somehow passed away in 2001 and became one of the greatest black sculptors that most people had never heard of.
Exactly. And that was the part I was getting to. How is it that a person who was as prolific as he was, how did he slip under the radar for so long?
Well, I think that's where somebody like a curator comes in. So if you consider that the radar is really art history, the kinds of people who make art history are not necessarily interested in a John Rhoden story. So we talk about, if you learn art history in a classroom, in a textbook, if you're relying on museums for art history, it's important that somebody who is in so many shows and winning so many prizes, but isn't getting, a scholar that's writing a book about them, or a curator or museum director that's doing a full show about them that, stays up for 4 or 5 months and tours the country. That's how he flies under the radar.
Well, gratefully, you are here to bring him back into the spotlight. Is it kismet? Is it serendipity that you were at the African American Museum where his art greeted you at the door every day, and now you're here curating his work? Or did you aim at it that way?
I think it's a little bit of serendipity, maybe a little bit of ancestral magic. I think that when
she just exclaimed "Black girl magic" right here on air, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, when the possibility came up, when I had heard that all of these sculptures by this unknown black sculptor in New York had come to PAFA because PAFA had a relationship with the executor of the Rhoden estate and was looking for an institution that could tell his story, but nobody had ever heard of. I thought, well, I've heard of him. I've actually, I walk by the sculpture by John Rhoden every day
Every
as a
day.
curatorial assistant at AMP. And so that I do feel like that's a little bit of serendipity and also just maybe a little bit of ancestral push to kind of this is a story that you could tell. This is a story that needs to be told. I think this is a story that Philly would love.
Well, speaking of Philly and you're telling stories, you are a bit of a rare bird. First of all, you're an anthropologist. I don't know how many African American women are anthropologists. You think you think women, you think Margaret Mead, and then you think Dr. Brittany Webb. I can't. I don't know any others. And 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 you're also a curator. And my understanding, if I have it right, is that only 4% of museum curators are black. You live a relatively lonely life. How can you, if you were to talk to young people and you were trying to get them to do what you do, how would you encourage and inspire them to think, I could be a curator in the field of the arts?
Well, even though that 4% number is incredibly small, it's not as lonely as it looks. I
Okay.
feel like there are a larger number of black women in anthropology than you would think. Zora Neale Hurston is one, even though she doesn't.
I never knew, really, I did not
Yeah,
know that. I love her work.
a lot of
Yeah.
people, love her for literature, but she's really a kind of a pioneering 20th century anthro figure for black women who anthro. And I do think that there are a lot of black women in the arts. A lot of black women who are artists are also curators. A lot of black women writers who care about the arts are
Mhm.
also curators. And there are ways that we network and find each other. So I would say if somebody is interested in the arts, is interested in exhibitions, wants to be a curator and maybe doesn't know how, I mean, really all you need is one. As soon as you meet one black curator, you sort of crack into a world of who all is curating all sorts of
Mhm.
places. There are networks. The AAMC is the Alliance of Art Museum Curators, is an organization that's working on diversifying the field. Black museums, there are black museums all over the country. They all have curators who are part of their networks and come through the doors and go out into museums. So it's a larger world than people think. But I do think that if I ran into a young person who was interested in this, I would say I promise you there's a way in, even if it's not obvious on the surface.
When I was growing up, I thought that an anthropologist was a woman married to uncle anthropologist. I had no idea. That went over. That was too much. Okay, had no idea what it was, but now I'm learning some things, and that there are people closer to me than I knew before. As an anthropologist now involved in the arts, how can we get young people to become more interested in the transformative power of art, how it can be used, first of all, to tell their story, and as you talked about, creating context where people can better understand what people are intending to do and what they're intending to say, how can we get them to understand and appreciate better how art can become a part of their world and a tool to tell their stories and to share their lived experiences?
Well, I think two things. One, I think more people are artists than they realize, especially young people. I think there are so many people with all kinds of artistic talent who, in their heart, are artists, and the world tells them that they aren't.
Mm.
And so my first impulse is to say, no, 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 let's stop doing that. There are so many more people who are artists than we realize. And that's the first thing. The second thing, I think one of the things that I love about museums in general and exhibitions is that part of what's great about going to a museum is that it allows you to look at work of art, have an experience, commune with a piece of art in a way that is unmediated. It's not on a screen.
Okay.
Once you get in that gallery, it's just you and that sculpture or you and that painting. Um, there's a kind of experience you can have that's just between you and the work that to me really feels divine. And I think that when you put those two together, one, you appreciate, if you are an artist, just the importance of the lineage that humans have had art since before we had language. This is something that we know as anthropologists. So, this is a fundamental feature of who we are as a species. We've always made art. So, if you are at your heart an artist or some kind of maker, that just connects you to us as a species that goes back, thousands of years. And so, and if you sit in a gallery where you get to have an experience with the work that's important, that's beautiful, that moves you for whatever reason, then it connects you to that lineage. And I think both of those things are transformative and important. You realize both how small you are in the scheme of things, but also how connected you are to something so grand and so fundamentally human.
You have really made this a spiritual experience talking about art, and I can't let you leave without asking: Are you a working artist yourself, or are you just administrating the working artists and the works of other artists?
I'm not. I think I'm an exhibition maker. I'm not an
Okay.
art maker myself. I do get asked that often, and I wish I had a kind of technical talent. But being in a place like PAFA, especially when you see people train in studio, is definitely a place where you realize whether or not you are an artist. And so I'm not an artist unless you consider exhibitions art.
Well, I do, and look, I know a guy. I just met this guy who's the president of an academy right here in Philadelphia
Oh
named
yeah.
Pryor, who's going to open his own painting studio, and I can hook you up if you'd like to try your hand at painting.
Oh, well, I'm always looking to discover a new artist and some new talent. So if you could
We will
put us
work
in
it out.
contact.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a warm round of applause for the curator of the Evelyn and Will Kaplan curator of the 20th Century Art Collection of John Rhoden, Dr. Brittany Webb. Thank you, Dr. Webb. I look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Thank you.